come. Let's get back to these banks now, specifically with what's going on with TARP. A new report just released points out some problems with TARP and says steps need to be taken to actually protect the taxpayer. All the comments coming in a report to Congress by TARP's Special Inspector General. And first of all, the report says investors could wrongly take advantage of the new public-private investment partnership. The report says the $2 trillion program creates potential unfairness to the taxpayer. The report also asks for more information about how banks are using that TARP money, and the report says the current monthly survey of their lending is simply not enough to follow this. Finally, the report says TALF is vulnerable to fraud. Remember, it's been about 6 months since we first learned about TARP. This report, which is 250 pages, is a quarterly report to Congress, also takes a shot at the Treasury Department for, as of yet, not adopting the Inspector General's previous recommendations. We'll keep you up to date as we hear more.
All right. Doesn't sound like they're happy with anything in that TARP program or any other program. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, who's in charge of all this, talking about the banks paying back TARP funds, telling the Wall Street Journal in an interview he did with the paper that the health of the bank is not going to be the only factor that determines if it can pay the money back. Geithner says the whole financial system needs to be stable and there has to be enough capital to lend more before a bank can repay the government. And the Washington Post reporting today, by the way, the administration may suspend interest payments by banks to the government. That would allow the banks to rebuild their capital quicker. Treasury Secretary is going to be up on the Hill today on Capitol Hill taking questions from the Congressional Oversight Panel on TARP. You see it there, 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. Questions on the TARP.
For an instant audit on this, we're joined by, is Joseph Leonard still with us now? He's still there. Joe, we appreciate it because you've been with us all morning, and we, well, bring in Charles for this as well, because let's talk a little bit about, well, you know, we talked last hour about Federal Reserve, the second in command, Donald Cohn, being optimistic about the economy moving forward, and the Treasury Secretary has echoed that comment, saying that we could see a modest recovery in the back half of the year. You know, what do you think about Tim Geithner so far, as we've had more exposure to Tim Geithner? He's going to be back at Capitol Hill today. What do you want to hear from him?
Well, you know, I just really want to hear what the long term is, not the short term of, you know, these banks, especially like the TARP money, when you're talking about how the banks want to start repaying this, and they may not want it back right now. They want to make sure that the banks have enough money to keep lending and doing this other stuff. Well, why are the banks so anxious to pay this back? Because they don't want government control in their telling them how they can run their business. And I think that that's important to the economy, that these banks want independence so that, hey, we're not going to be looked at over this TARP money anymore. We want to pay this back. Yes, it was a great loan to us for the meantime to stabilize us. But let's pay it back and be on our merry way and try to build our business on our own instead of being over all the oversight that we're getting from the federal government right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Charles, you know, what's your view on that? I mean, what should be the criteria for a bank having to pay back the TARP? I mean, in other words, should it be? Should there be written down rules, say if you do this, then you can pay it back, or should you just be able to pay it back no matter what?
Well, the problem with that is it's after the fact. If you write the rules now, that's been the whole argument of Wall Street in the first place. Listen, you know what? We get involved in these things and then the rules change. The bottom line is that's where the government made a huge, huge mistake. They let these guys have a backdoor. There was no real mandate. You know, Bob O'Brien and I talked about this yesterday. We even differ on what we thought the program was. He thought it was just so banks could get healthy. I thought, like Congress and the American people, the idea was we would give them taxpayer money so that they had the ability to distribute it to taxpayers. And as it turns out, that's not the case. We saw the report in the Wall Street Journal, lending down dramatically, particularly at some of these banks that reported fantastic earnings in the last week. So the American public should be outraged. This Inspector General report is exactly what a lot of people have been saying. It's shocking. I don't know if Congress is going to listen to this or the White House. Someone should really real soon, because this is crazy that these banks are in a position to make so much money. And private equity? You talk private equity? These guys who make so much money are going to be able to put this money into these investments, and the taxpayer take all the risk. It's nuts.
Right. That's why I was making the point earlier, and BlackRock's talked a little bit about this. Some other firms about, hey, let's let consumers invest in this in some way, shape, or form. So, because why should just the firms be getting, you know, whether it's a mutual fund or something else?
And that's silly too, in terms of, you know what, the same people, the same Democrats who run the White House and pretty soon maybe even Congress, when it came to saving Social Security, they said the stock market was too risky, and they've been gloating about the fact that it's fallen apart since then. But you're going to let the same people you don't want to buy IBM by toxic assets, again, it's kind of nutty.
Okay, good enough, Charles. And thanks to Joe Leonard for all his time today as well. Good discussion, right, Charles? I hope you and Bob settled your differences yesterday.
Yeah, we had
heated
a
when you were
beer.
out. Oh, good.
Instead of money.
Well, you know, that's good. All right, Charles, thank you very much.